Imagine this, a newspaper page from 1974 surfaces on your timeline. The headline is about fuel scarcity or a recession indicator, or some politician caught with his hand in the national till. And for a moment you think, when exactly was this published? Because it could have been yesterday. For over a decade, history disappeared from the Nigerian school curriculum, and an entire generation of young people acquired an education with little to no historical context. Because of this, we have found ourselves going around in circles, having the same conversations over and over again without even realizing. The evidence of that loop, decades of headlines that ran too closely with today, was buried in physical archives, inaccessible to almost everyone. We would have had the same feeling, maybe, but not the solid, indisputable proof. But it's not just proof of stagnation, it's proof of vitality too, proof of the richness of our Nigerianness, affirming that we have always been interesting and generous with our culture. The fact that someone went looking for the proof at all is the real story, because digitizing 50 years of Nigerian newspapers doesn't happen by accident. It only happened because one person decided that the knowledge gap was unacceptable and wanted to do something about it. And that decision to act was the start of a project that became a new way of preserving history. Welcome to Creative Capital, a curated series where we conduct expert breakdowns of how African creative entrepreneurs build standout enterprises. In today's episode, we're mapping out the inspiring trajectory of archiving, a journey that began with one man's relentless pursuit of the past. That man is Fu'ad Lawal, and his path to building archiving was anything but linear. Fu'ad did not set out to become a keeper of Nigerian memory. He studied chemistry at Madonna University, and finding no other jobs on the other side of his degree, he drifted into journalism instead. He was good at it. He rose through Pulse Nigeria, landed at Big About Media, and eventually became editor-in-chief of Zikoko, one of the more influential digital outlets on the continent. It was a solid career, but something kept bothering him. It was uncommonly difficult to find documented and verifiable historical precedent to give context to the stories that he was trying to write. In a 2023 interview with Rest of World, Lawal explained it as such. As a journalist, it was frustrating to write about a particular place, but not find any information online. It's hard to build context, which is very crucial in creating deep reporting. To understand why, a little history helps. Nigeria's internet presence is relatively young, and this is because the internet only began to gain traction in Nigeria in the late 2000s. Digital media didn't make a proper appearance until the 2010s. That meant that for everything that happened before, the coups, oil booms, famines, elections, ordinary Tuesday afternoons of 5 decades, there was almost nothing to find online. If you wanted the story of Nigeria's past, you were essentially staring into a vacuum, unless you had access to dusty papers in archives of universities or old libraries of some wealthy people. The usual way out of this was to subscribe to foreign publications that had some coverage in their already digitized archives. Lawal mentioned that at some point he had a subscription to the New York Times for things like that. But the light bulb moment came in 2019. He was the editor-in-chief of Zikoko at the time, and he tweeted about the digitization of the academic research papers authored every year by thousands of final year students in Nigeria. The public conversation was quite bubbly, and it triggered a slew of private conversations too. Cynthia and Ndeche reached out to help in bringing the idea to life, but the conversation led to a bigger question. What about newspapers? Nigeria's print media had been documenting the country's life since before independence. Where was all of it, and how could we access these newspapers? Later in the year, in December 2019, Lawal got his answer. On his return from Jollof Road, an 80-day road trip through West Africa, Lawal stopped at the Usman Dan Fodio University Library in Sokoto. He found decades of physical newspapers stacked in the archives, and in that moment, looking at the treasure trove of material, his mission was born. As he came from the trip, he sketched out what the project would look like. In Fuad's words, from January 1st, 1960 to December 31st, 2010, there are 18,627 days. How much will we find if we go looking for at least one newspaper from every day within this time period? This was a question he needed to answer. He started the project with a group of friends as a weekend hobby to see how many newspapers they could find in libraries and archives across the country. Within 6 weeks, They had located 97% of the papers, but Lawal had yet to figure out how to properly finance the project. While waiting, he wrote a manifesto for the project and shared it with his friend Justin Herabo, who loved it so much and excitedly shared it with his thousands of Twitter followers, unaware that it was for his eyes only. More people read the project manifesto, forcing Lawal's hand to publish it on his Vistanium Substack. That manifesto, titled 18,000 Days, made a pointed observation. If you searched for Nigerian stories from the 1970s, you were more likely to find them in the New York Times than in any local outlet, because Nigerian newspapers from that era had no digital archives. That accidental leak in 2020 became archiving's real tipping point, attracting more volunteers and donors willing to throw money at the vision. Then came the walls. To get official archives, archiving needed to be a registered entity, but registration required navigating Nigerian bureaucracy, which is its own endurance sport. They realized that for any official progress to be made, the project needed structure. It needed legitimacy. But when Lawal approached the Lagos State Records and Archives Bureau for access to their collections, the Director General told him clearly they could not deal with an unregistered entity. That was the moment archiving began its painful journey through Nigeria's bureaucracy. But the project still had two walls it couldn't break through: no publisher agreement and getting the scanner to do the work. The industrial-grade overhead scanner they needed, a 7-foot machine capable of capturing high-resolution images without damaging fragile pages, had a price tag of 19 million naira. They were able to order it with funds they raised, but it was stuck in global supply chain chaos for over a year, thanks to COVID. In May 2021, Lawal published another Substack titled Limbo, a public rant about all of it. It worked. A volunteer named Ladi Tawak asked her father to speak to his friend Bayo Ononuga, the founder of PM News. A few phone calls later, PM News signed a legal agreement with Archiving to reproduce and redistribute its archives, the first publisher partnership. Simultaneously, journalist Ayodeji Rotinwa connected Lawal to Stanley Achonu of Warren, who physically walked the paperwork through the Ministry of Justice and got Archiving registered. The company was eventually registered as Dust to Digital. They named it after the state where the newspapers were found. For the scanner, the team had to navigate a global supply chain crisis and Nigeria's complex government bureaucracy. The scanner arrived in Nigeria in November 2022, but spent another month stuck in red tape at customs before its eventual release in January 2023. After that, it was time to get to work. The team, 4 full-time volunteers operating out of an upstairs bedroom in Lawal's home in Lekki, Lagos, got to work in April 2023. The sourced newspapers were manually tagged, scanned, and uploaded to a digital repository with keywords for searchability. By October 2023, they had fully digitized the entire PM News archive, spanning 17 years from 1994 to 2010, hitting 50,000 pages. Meanwhile, on September 30, 2023, Archiving went live. The response was immediate. Pages from the archive went viral, not because they were curiosities, but because they were weapons against misinformation, tools for context, and windows into a country that had never properly seen itself. In one instance, Lawal shared a 1951 Nigerian Observer article showing how Afrobeats swept London, helping debunk the narrative that Afrobeats had been obscure until Beyoncé's attention. Today, Archiving is far more than a digital newspaper repository. The website is freely accessible with over 50,000 pages and more than 120,000 stories available online. The long-term goal is nothing less than 5 million pages. Luminate committed $160,000 to supporting the archivist, Archiving's editorial arm, and the Archiving Fellowship, a program that commissions researchers, writers, filmmakers, and historians to create original work from the archives. The first fellowship call drew 1,438 applications from across Nigeria and beyond. Fellows have produced animated short films about the Nigerian Civil War, podcasts about ordinary Nigerians across the decades, and deep investigations into recurring patterns in Nigeria's history. The project has also launched The More Things Change, an initiative specifically designed to surface Nigeria's cycle of repetition using the growing archival collection. When they started the project, they thought that the raw materials, the information itself, was the most important part of the process. What they discovered was that the interpretation was equally powerful. What you do with history once you've rescued it from the dust. This shift matters because archives on their own don't change anything. What changes things is what people are able to do with them. In the 87th edition of Communique, Jolomi puts it this way: archiving is in the fourth stage in the evolution of memory projects where data becomes usable knowledge. Without this stage, archives risk becoming static museums, impressive but inert. But with it, they can transform into dynamic tools for sense-making, helping societies understand their past, confront their present, and perhaps interrupt the cycles they seem destined to repeat. If archiving succeeds, old newspapers will no longer be just a record of what happened. They will help determine what happens next, and they will color the stories we tell about the future. There's one more thing we haven't talked about. How did Lawal and Co. get funded to set the project in motion? By the time scanning began, archiving had raised over $37,000 from individual donors. The first donation came from Okpemipo Aikomo, head of design at Paystack at the time, 50,000 naira. Small but symbolic. From there, the project leaned into radical transparency. Every donation from 1,000 naira to $25,000 was logged in a public spreadsheet. Progress updates were shared openly. This community-driven open book fundraising model was a deliberate choice and a key part of what made it work. People were not donating to a faceless organization. They were reading progress updates, following along on Substack, watching the spreadsheet move. The trust compounded and it became capital. The archiving story is a textbook example of how to build a creative project in public. And so, for anyone building something in the African media and creative industries, the takeaway is hard to ignore. If people can see it, understand it, and trust it, they won't just support it, they will help carry it forward. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.